in my power, and I will use my voice in ways that I think try to lift this debate, that attempts to raise us out of the tribalism that sometimes tends to take hold. I'll every day remind my supporters what this is about, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us, all the candidates who remain in this now recount process, that we will compel people toward our better angels as we do what is right and what is in the best interests of the people of our state and the people of our country, and that is to reassure hope in the democratic process, not to undermine it, and certainly not to shred it. With that, I want to yield the podium to my attorney, Mr. Barry Richard.
Before I answer questions, and I suspect you have a few, I want to make a comment on a recurring theme that I've heard since Election Day. I keep hearing the term deja vu. I keep reading and hearing people say this is a repeat of 2000. I want to tell you that I have a little personal experience with 2000, and this is not 2000. It's vastly, vastly different. So let me tell you very briefly why. In 2000, the recount system was entirely candidate motivated. There was no recount unless a candidate asked for it. The candidate had the right to designate which counties would be recounting the vote, and they motivated those counties. Within days after the election in 2000, there were 47 lawsuits filed that went on for 36 days. This is not 2000. And the reason it's not 2000 is largely because the Florida legislature was determined not to allow a repeat of that, and it changed our laws significantly. Now the recounts are not generated by any action by the candidates. They're automated. And they're automated based upon the legislature's conclusion after study that a certain margin of difference between the candidates was sufficient to require that there be a machine recount in order to ensure that the vote was accurate. And then if the machine recount resulted in a lower margin of error, below 0.25%, there would then be a hand recount statewide of the overvotes and undervotes. That's all automated. It's just an extension of the voting count according to Florida law, and that's the posture that we're in right now. So that's a great difference. The one thing, by the way, that has been consistent from 2000 until now, consistently adhered to by every court that's addressed it, including the United States Supreme Court and the Florida Supreme Court, is what Mayor Gillum commented on, which is that every vote must count. And that's what this entire system is designed to do. So with that in mind, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question regarding your race right now is not within is not below the threshold that would require set the stage for a hand recount. However, if the U.S. Senate race did go to that, can the governor's race in any way be a beneficiary of that? Can you collect votes that are revealed in a hand recount of another race?
Well, that's a good question, and let me point out something. One other similarity to 2000 is much of what we're doing here is unprecedented. We've never had this type of machine recount before, and at some point we may have to have courts tell us what the answer is, and I don't know that I can, at this point, specifically answer your question. My immediate reaction is that it goes back to that premise that every vote should count. And so once we learn that votes weren't counted, you don't throw them out just because of the fact that one candidate did it, another one did not do it. Having said that, the way that the system works is that if the margin is below 0.5%, as you know, there's an immediate machine recount. If it then falls to below 0.25%, then there's a statewide manual recount. So if and then within a certain number of days in each of these instances, these take place. So whether or not it could inure to a different candidate depends upon where it falls in that statutory scheme.
Barry, is there any indication that you guys are considering joining Nelson's lawsuit with the mismatched signatures, extending the deadline? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I've had no discussion about that with Mayor Gillum. or the campaign team, so I can't answer the question.
The mayor mentioned signatures as the signature problem as maybe a case of voter suppression. Do you guys believe that that's intentional?
I don't think we have any evidence to accuse anybody of anything being intentional at this time. If evidence surfaces to that effect, whether it goes in favor of Mayor Gillum or Mr. DeSantis, then appropriate action should be taken, both to ensure that the person who committed fraud is brought to justice and that the votes are counted.
What's the mayor's assessment of how Broward supervisor elections have been handled, the counting of ballots down there?
I haven't discussed that with Mayor Gillum, and I don't know anything except the rumors that I've heard. So the assessment, I think, is if it was improperly handled, it should be corrected. If it was properly handled, it's not a problem. I know that's a non-answer for you, but I just don't have the facts to be able to say anything else. I'm certainly not going to accuse anybody of anything when I don't know whether it was true or not. I've been in this business of law too long to know that you can't make assumptions just because of what you hear.
Mr. Richard, Mayor Gillum mentioned that the actual machine recount has commenced. Have they physically started recounting these votes?
Well, my understanding is it has commenced. However, when we talk about recounting the votes, the way it's commenced at this stage is that the ballots are fed through the machines again. And my understanding is that that should have happened beginning at noon today.
Do you have any concerns that because there are 3 statewide races that are being tabulated or that are going through a machine recount? I was speaking with Leon County Supervisor of Elections, Mark Early. He said that this is going to be much more complicated than many people have been making it out to be, especially with the over and under votes with different races all going through and needing to be separated race by race. Do you have confidence that this is going to be, done correctly?
Well, I learned from prior experience that it's always more complicated than those of us watching it think it is. And I certainly have sympathy for the supervisors who have to do it. But I will tell you, it's far, far less complicated than it was in 2000. And the votes are either there or they're not there. And on each ballot, when we talk in case your viewers don't understand what we're talking about, an overvote is when a ballot shows more than one vote in the same race. An undervote is when it shows no vote in that race. And so the machine supposedly will kick these ballots out, and then somebody has to we run them through again after we make sure the machine is working properly and see if it does it again. And then if it does, and if the margin of error is small, or the margin of difference is small enough, then somebody has to look at those ballots and see. I guess you could say that's a complex process, and how long it takes depends upon the number of ballots we're talking about and the number of people who are assigned to the task. But the legislature made the determination that it should take about 3 or 4 days to go through the machine recount.
Mr. Richard, Mayor Gillum said he's prepared to accept the results as long as all the votes are counted. If the machine recount comes back with a result that's not below the 0.25 threshold for a manual recount, are we done? Is he going to accept the results then?
I think the best way for me to answer that is that Mayor Gillum is not waiving any legal right that he has to ensure that all of the votes are counted. That's one of the reasons that he hired me. And so without all of the facts, I can't answer that question. I think that when the machine recount is finished, if he is satisfied that the system has worked properly and there are no uncounted votes out there that should be counted, then I imagine he'll be satisfied. He's not going to file a lawsuit for no reason. On the other hand, if there's evidence that there are votes out there that were not counted, even with the machine recount, that might make a difference, then I imagine we'll look at that and take whatever action is appropriate. I think that Mayor Gillum, and I don't want to speak for him as a political spokesman, because that's not what I was hired to do. I was hired as a lawyer. But my understanding of his position is that his obligation is not only to himself, but to the people who voted both for him and his opposition to be sure that all those votes are counted.
Is there any reason to take legal action now that you see or you anticipate anything in this process where for suit taking too long?
I haven't seen anything as of this moment that would justify taking legal action, or we would have done it.
What defines an uncounted vote, Barry? There are potentially thousands of vote by mail ballots that have been flagged for mismatches. In the mayor's view, if they're not counted, are those votes that should be counted?
Well, if a vote if a ballot is a legal ballot and it's been properly executed and it's not voted, then it's a vote that should be counted. And we have a system that's been designed to ensure that we pick up those ballots and that we do count them. I mean, as I said before, that is the absolute crux of this. All of what we go through is to ensure that not a single person whose ballot should be counted is left uncounted. That's why we do it, and it's actually at the core of our democracy. So that I don't know what the reasons are that any given ballot is uncounted. The other thing, by the way, that the Florida Supreme Court has told us is that no voter's ballot should go uncounted because of an error or misconduct by an election official, and that was clearly established in 2000. So a lot has to do with that. Now, if it's the fault of the voter, that's one thing. But if it's the fault of a machine or a supervisor of an election or anybody else who touches the ballot, then it should be corrected.
How much confidence do you have that you're gonna find close to 33,000?
You're out of my sphere of knowledge at this point. I'm not a mathematician and I'm not a statistician, and I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you that the legislature, when they devised these laws, made the determination that the margins that they set were margins in which there was a realistic chance that it would make a difference. That's how they selected those margins. So that's a legislative determination, and I don't have the knowledge to rethink that determination.
One last question, folks.
Last week, President Trump said there could be a role for the federal government to play in this recount. I don't know what that role would be. Can you think of one besides like federal court?
Well, speaking generically, the only role of the federal government in state elections is if they violate the United States Constitution, or if for some reason they violate some federal law. That would be the only role. At this point, other than the fact that we are always operating under the requirements of the U.S. Constitution, just in general, I don't know of any specific role.
I had a question. Given that more than 8 million votes have been cast, one thing about the hand recount is the overvotes and undervotes are what's going to be counted, and there has to be enough of them to make a potential difference in the outcome for the manual recount to proceed. Would you anticipate that out of that vast number of votes, the number of votes that are going to be kicked out by the machines are going to be enough to continue the manual recount?
Well, that's essentially the same question that was asked in another form, and the answer is that I don't have the expertise to answer the likelihood of that happening, but the legislature, after whatever study it did, which was extensive, by the way, determined that out of a vote such as 8 million votes, 8.5 million votes, that when the margin was below a 0.25%, that there was a sufficiently statistical possibility that the election would be flipped, that it was worth going to the trouble of a manual recount. And again, this is not something that any candidates decided. Florida legislature decided it, and we're all living with that law, and we're all abiding by it.
Thank you all for your time, folks. That's all we have time for today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't break sweat.
I've got to go steal his audio.